My name is Alicia, and I have psoriatic disease, and I've been dealing with it for the last 3 decades, since I was about 7 years old. I started noticing symptoms of psoriasis probably around the age of 6. Like, I had these heavy, dry lesions on my elbows and knees, but we just thought I had really dry skin. And it wasn't until I ended up with chickenpox. Now, normally you get chickenpox and there's some scarring that occurs after it goes away. Well, the scarring that I was experiencing seemed to be morphing into something more serious. It was thick, it was inflamed, it was itchy. It just wasn't what you normally see with chickenpox scars. And so at this point, I'm around 7 years old. My grandmother takes me to see the doctor. They survey my skin and they determined that I had plaque psoriasis. And at this point, I was around 90% covered. So it really was a quick transition to go from like, oh, these really dry patches of skin on your knees and elbows to being fully inflamed and covered with this disease that we had no knowledge about. Being diagnosed that young was really confusing because I didn't understand what that meant. Like, doctor said, hey, you have psoriasis, but I didn't know how that was going to impact my life. So I remember early on being young and not really understanding beauty standards and what that would mean for me in the future. So was still wearing short sleeves and shorts, but then you start to notice the stares and you start to get questions from people. And again, I'm 7 or 8. Like, that's a big responsibility for a child to have to explain not only to her peers, but the adults around her. So I remember I started hiding around the 5th grade. I was 10 years old, and that's when that puberty starts to set in. That's when beauty standards become apparent. That's when the importance of good skin and what that means as a teenager all comes into play. And so, kind of being like that preteen, it was just a lot for me. I remember lying to my peers and saying, hey, it's eczema, because I would get less questions. Like, as soon as I would say psoriasis, people would have more questions that I did not know how to answer. So it was really difficult, not only physical, but on my mental and emotional health, and just how I had to navigate myself as well as the relationships around me. Soon after I was diagnosed, there were a series of treatments, mainly topical. It was topical treatments that I had to use 2 or 3 times a day, which is a huge responsibility for a 7-year-old to have to navigate. Um, I think I have a little bit of undiagnosed ADHD even back then because it was just so hard to be consistent. Like, I still struggle with that. So using those type of treatments typically didn't work. And honestly, it's only so much that your parents can do. Like, they're not with you 24/7, you know. There's a level of responsibility that you have to have as a kid with a chronic illness that kids without chronic illnesses probably don't experience in the same way. So it mainly was topical treatments, and then it moved into light treatment, so like phototherapy. And it was so severe that the doctor said I really needed to go 4 to 5 times a week. I was living with my grandparents at the time. They were on a fixed income. I think I had Medicaid or Medicare, whichever one kids have in low income situations. And so it was an incredible burden for them to have to take me to the hospital 4 to 5 times a week so that I could get light therapy. And it never worked. And sometimes I reflect back on that because I used light therapy on and off for about 10 years, not understanding that if a treatment does not work within a year, it's probably not going to work for you at all. But you're just so desperate and you just hope that eventually something will trigger it to like be effective for you, that you just continue to do it, especially since as an adolescent in the 90s, early 2000s, there weren't a lot of options. So, I was desperate. I just used what it is that I could. Another form of treatment that I used was occlusion, which is a really old school treatment. They slather your body down with an ointment. They put you in pajamas. They wet the pajamas. Then they put you in a plastic suit, those plastic suits that people use for weight loss. And I had to sit in that for 8 hours a day. And this kind of happened as towards the end of my high school career and then in college. So a lot of times when I would come home from college, I would spend 3 weeks of my summer in the hospital getting this treatment, and you would spend the night. So it would be phototherapy in the morning, then you're in the suit for 8 hours a day, then you go back to your room. And I remember sitting in there with other older people. Like, I was always the youngest one, and we would like watch Prices Right. Like, I got up on all my game shows with that treatment. But yeah, that experience was pretty tough as a kid because I just didn't have that many options because of age, as well as the time, being in the 90s, early 2000s. It just wasn't a lot that I could use during that time. So it was really difficult. So when I think about finding the right treatment, it makes me emotional, um, because having psoriasis for so long and you try different treatments and nothing seems to work. And I remember being in my early 20s and trying a biologic for the first time and it not working. And at that point, I had kind of just given up, especially because it was a treatment that I had heard about and I had waited for so long to finally get the opportunity to try it, and it did not work. So, about 5 years after that, I was at an event for the National Psoriasis Foundation, and I had this little short Jewish doctor walk up to me and she's like, "How long have you had psoriasis?" So I'm explaining my journey to her, and she's like, "I can get you cleared." She was like, "You need to come see me." And she slid me her card. And I went to go see her, and she surveyed my skin, and she gave me this biologic. And for the first time, I experienced skin clearance. And so I went from being 90% covered with psoriasis to about 80% clear. So I had about 20% of coverage, which was on my legs, which is typically the most stubborn part of your body because of the blood circulation. And so I remember going to her and I'm like, "I'm 80% clear. I'm good." And she was like, "No, I can do better." I don't know if it was her ego or like if it's a doctor thing, but she was like, "No, we can do even better." So I stayed on that medicine for a while because I didn't want to risk it. And the fact that I was 80% clear was good enough for me. But then after about 2 years, it stopped working. So I went back to her and she gave me these different options. And she told me what she felt like would work well based on what she saw in the clinical trials and how my psoriasis presented. So we really worked together to choose another treatment. 4 biologics later, they all worked to a degree, but they only would work for like 2 years and then they would stop working. The current biologic I'm on, which is my fifth biologic, has been the longest working biologic, and I'm 100% clear. And that's something that I never thought in a million years would happen for me, 100% clearance. So I love my doctor so much because she's involved in clinical trials and she kept her word. She said that 80% was not good enough. And thank goodness for her expertise and her research that led me to a treatment that got me to a clear place. And it's crazy having this disease since the 90s and seeing how there were hardly any drugs. And now we have so many treatments to choose from. So if one doesn't work for you, you don't have to lose hope because there's another type of treatment that works in a different way that may work for you. So the journey for treatment has been really difficult, but it's also been a journey of hope because even though I've been on 4 other biologics, they have all worked to some degree. And when they stop working, my doctor always had something else that she felt like could help. I came to my first IDEOM meeting in 2014. They made it real good because we did it in Rome. So I could not pass up that opportunity. But some people from the National Psoriasis Foundation really admired the work that I was doing for the psoriasis community, especially people of color. And so they thought that this opportunity would be great for me to come and speak out and to give my perspective, which is really unique from being a woman, from being Black, from being a kid that had this disease for so long. And so once they told me what the mission and the purpose was, this was something that I could not pass up. I have a background in chemistry, and science has always been a love of mine. And so even though I don't necessarily do it like in a deep professional way where like I'm a doctor or a nurse, I still have the skills and the drive, the passion, and the experience to really contribute in a valuable way. So it was just an opportunity that I felt like I could not pass up. And it was just a godsend opportunity. So that's why I signed up. Some of the highlights that I've had working with this foundation is seeing our work in studies, like seeing how they are impacting clinical trials and making a difference. Another is seeing how it has evolved. I'm gonna be honest. When I first did this, I was like one of the only brown faces in the room, other than some doctors. So now to see all of these patients that are Black, Hispanic, Asian, from different countries, from Greece, from Singapore, from Africa, it's beautiful to see how much it has evolved and how many new voices we have gathered in order to give their experience about what it is like to live with these different autoimmune diseases. So that's what's been so fulfilling for me, to kind of come in at the beginning and see the growth that this organization has provided over time, not only for patients, but for clinical trials as well. My goal as a patient researcher is to continue to give my experience, but also bring the voices of people who aren't here. Being in the community, hearing patient experiences, um, being forward thinking, like thinking about uh, challenges or issues that may not have necessarily been brought to the forefront, but things that I understand and know just from my own experience, and then also talking to other patients. Because I feel like when you're here as a patient researcher, you're not just representing yourself, you're representing an entire community as to the impact of this condition. So that's what I see myself as. I see myself as a representation, not only for myself, but for other people living with the condition. And so, um, continuing to talk to people in the psoriasis community, listening to their stories, being in the online support groups, also letting other patients know about this organization. I have referred some patients living with HS to take part of this, especially men of color. Like every time I meet a Black man or Hispanic or Asian and they say they have psoriasis or HS, I try to tell them about this program, because from what I've noticed, it's just so much harder to get men involved, and especially of men of different ethnicities. So that has been my goal, and that has been my purpose, and that's what drives me to be a patient researcher for this foundation. One of the goals I would love to see from IDEOM is really getting the aspect of how this condition impacts kids. We have been really focused on adults, which is great and it means a lot. But I also feel like children have similar issues, but they're a different set of issues because they're kids. So it's so much that they feel like is out of their control, and it impacts their mental and emotional health even more. And then you're constantly confronted with the world in a way that's kind of different from adults, because as an adult, like, I can control my situation, like if I want to cover up or if I don't want to go somewhere that makes me feel uncomfortable. With kids, you kind of have to just deal with your circumstances. Like if you're having a hard time at school because of bullying, you can't just be like, oh, I want to go to another school. Like, it's really complicated. Or, you want to be really social, and you only have so many options or so many people to connect with, so you don't really have that ability to say, oh, well, I don't want to see these people in my class anymore that are making fun of me. So there, in also me being a kid with a visible chronic condition, it was really difficult, and I wish I would have had the means and the platform then to kind of express what I was going through, so that maybe as I aged, I would have more tools and have been more equipped to dealing with those challenges. I was kind of just making it work as I went. So I would like to see more of that.